Hey, Eric. Off the wall question. Are you related to Carolyn Tice?
I am not.
Okay.
But good. I get that a lot about a number of other people. It's usually the question about the old football coach, Mike Tice, but not related to him either.
No, thanks. It's just an unusual name. Thanks.
Welcome, folks. Oh, I see Jeff Mendoza's on the call.
Thanks. Yeah. Amir is out today, so I'll be shepherding this meeting. As usual, we'll start at about 5 after. If you have any topics, go ahead and drop them into the meeting agenda that's linked to the calendar invite. If you don't have any of that, just ask in chat or ask here.
Okay.
Also, as always, it's optional to add your name as an attendee.
So I want to re-add to the agenda, and I'm going to put Jacques on the spot, and I'm sorry about that. But I know this, it's the whole how, I'd like to continue our discussion also about how do we how do we determine and update or replace the critical projects list, combining the data with human information. I know you care about this, and I do. I care about it. You've actually done the research, so
I'm still doing the research.
you're still doing the research. Okay, so maybe I can beg you to give a 60-second update of what you've learned so far.
Briefly, holy shit, people talk a lot about a lot of things. There are several literatures and they're enormous, so I barely skimmed the surface.
Got it. Okay.
I mean, I can
Jacques,
talk. I can
sorry.
extemporize when we get to it, to that
Okay.
part of the agenda.
Okay. I just tried to capture what you just said, and I may have done it correctly, but maybe. I made the attempt. How's that?
There's nothing libelous.
I was reaching for the higher bar of accurately capture, but I guess I'll take not libelous as a start. Oh, are we recording? And shouldn't we? Yeah, we are recording. Never mind. I'm going to post the link again. Oh, don't have edit rights. Okay, we can.
His name got added by, I think, David Edelson.
Yes, indeed. Excellent. Okay. And Darcy's also been added. Okay. GitHub NPM. Okay. Welcome. Jeff, your show.
Yep.
Whenever you want
to. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. And thanks for adding to the agenda. As usual, we'll start the meeting with new attendee introductions. If you're new here or haven't joined in a while or haven't introduced yourself in a previous meeting, feel free to jump in and say hello and anything you'd like about yourself while you're here. All right.
Hi, I'm Marina. I'm a PhD student at NYU. I think I know some of you from other working groups and such, but new to this particular one. I'm here kind of so I've been participating in the Securing Software Repositories working group, the new working group there. And one of the things we've discussed there that's kind of relevant to me as an academic is the possibility of creating kind of a repository of data about software repositories and projects on them. And so I thought I'd come here and kind of exchange some ideas, make sure that we're all working together to see if this is something that we'd like to collaborate on. So I have a document I can share about that as well.
I'm sorry, you're looking for a repository of data about X? Help me understand
No,
that.
oh, sorry. I guess I didn't explain that properly. Sorry. So I've been working with maintainers of software repositories. So think
Got
people
that.
like IPI, NPM, whoever, Ruby Gems. I see Jack here. And then we're kind of trying to figure out if there's interest both from the repository maintainer side and from kind of the OpenSSF Linux Foundation side in having a central place to store some data about these repositories, the packages on them, the usage patterns, for the purposes of doing both research projects and kind of things like the stuff I understand this working group is doing in identifying critical things, common issues, anything like that that could be useful.
So when you ask if you want to know if there's interest in having a central place, are you interested in making that like a work stream of this working group?
That's part of the question, is where this
Mhm.
would best live, is like
I
maybe
see.
in this working group, maybe in that other working group, but just want to talk to everybody before we make those kinds of decisions. So
Should I add it to the agenda?
oh yeah, feel free to
Well,
add to the
are
agenda.
you
Sorry, I probably
prepared?
should've done that.
Yeah, so are you prepared to make a kind of like a longer proposal?
Yeah, I have a
minutes?
document I'll share as well, which has more detail than I could say in the, yeah.
But prepared today, or do you want to add it to the agenda today, or do you want to like plan for?
I can add it to the agenda
within-
today. Yeah, I'll add a
Okay.
link to that document. And
Yeah, I think
know
it's
people don't
pretty-
have time to read it now, so it's okay if folks want to push that off as well. I don't
Yeah,
want to force people to read
the
something in 5 minutes.
agenda's pretty short, so I think we have time to get to it.
Yeah, and
Awesome.
I
Welcome.
can point to some things when we get to that point. So excellent.
All right, any other new attendees?
I'm a repeating offender. I've been here before and I've been around OpenSSF for quite a few months now, but I don't regularly attend this call. So I'm part of the open technology group at IBM, an open source, open standard specialist. And more recently, I started playing with the criticality score tool. And I actually submitted a couple of pull requests, and I've had some chat on the Slack channel with Caleb. And so I was available. I saw the call on the agenda. I figured I would join, see what's up.
Awesome, welcome.
Thank you.
I think I'm also new. So I go by Jono. I've met some of you before, different places. I'm at CertCC at Carnegie Mellon. I'm coming at all of this stuff from a vulnerability management and prioritization perspective. I have led our work on the stakeholder-specific vulnerability categorization stuff. Criticality seems like it is related to some of the stuff that we would expect to use to prioritize vols sort of generally. So I'm interested in it from that perspective. I'm also on things like the CVSS SIG and the EPSS SIG at first for other vol categorization stuff. So I can happy to talk about stuff that's going on there if it's relevant, if people need that context. Thanks.
Welcome, Jonathan. Glad to have you. Anybody else?
I think I'm a first timer at this meeting. I could be wrong. I've been lurking the OpenSSF repo for a little bit. My name is Darcy Clark. I'm the EM for the NPM CLI team, as well as the GitHub CLI team. So unique scope there, and have been for about 3 years working on NPM. And can be a gateway, hopefully, for change and innovation in the ecosystem there, but also have been working closely with the OpenJS Foundation, helped champion the package vulnerability collab space that we kicked off last year, which tangentially, I think, aligns with what's happening in the OpenSSF space. So want to consolidate efforts, also ideally tie some of the work that's being done here back into the NPM open source project. So yeah, happy to be here. Would love to contribute in any way possible and get my team involved, and yeah, extend an olive branch when there's one that can be extended. So yeah.
Oh, thanks for joining. Welcome. Any other new members? All right, I guess that's about it. So we'll move on to the agenda, and something that we had talked about in the previous meeting that we wanted to do today was discuss the charter. And if you click the link, it'll bring you to issue 52. And we're very thankful to see Rob for giving us a really good example here on the second link on that issue. The charter for the security tooling working group. And just scrolling through it, to me, it looks like it's not very customized per working group. So it seems like this is essentially something that you know, we would pretty much take as is. And anyways, so onto the discussion. You know, has anybody looked at it? Does anybody have any comments? Has anybody been part of this process in another working group? The floor is open. Oh, and Jacques, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I read through it as part of setting up the securing software repos group. It's fairly boilerplatey. There were 2 notes, I think, that came out of it for me, or 3. One is that it sets up some guardrails for if things go wrong. So it has a formal process which basically would show up once in a million years if things are going off the rails. So I think that's its real purpose or value. The second thing is that we will need to define a list of maintainers. So the sort of the process for changing policies is built around these folks who are identified as maintainers of the working group. So at some point, you have to sort of bootstrap that list. And the third is that this is just a very small one. I have a bug open on the template repo where it comes from. There's a fragment of text in part 2F, which doesn't seem to fit. It talks about sending voting members to the TAC. And it's just like, that's not a thing that you can do. Like the TAC is elected. There's no sort of delegating upwards. So those would be my notes.
If I may jump in,
Mhm.
I think the key is, you know, some sort of statement of what is this group officially, what is the scope of this group? I think that's really what they're looking for. The boilerplatey thing, I mean, there's a TSC that doesn't exist. I think that just needs to be removed. I think the TAC would like to have somebody from the working group showing up, you know, and that, you know, that could be a TAC member or somebody else, but just, you know, I think the concern right now is the TAC doesn't necessarily always hear what the working groups are doing, and vice versa. So I think there's a goal for some communication, so everybody
Also,
kind of stays in sync.
I think also TAC want to nail down the formalities. That
Right.
seems to be like a theme for this TAC is
Yes.
getting all the ducks in a row.
Yeah, and I think that's reasonable because, you know, this is the first year we actually have funding now as opposed to the you know, the previous system. I will tell you that although things aren't set in stone, I've been interacting a little bit with the folks who are trying to nail that down. I think one of the bigger changes that I would like to see, and I think it's going to happen, is the TAC would like the working groups, you know, kick off projects, but talk to the TAC, you know, basically preliminary, you're in, but tell the TAC so if there's an issue, because otherwise it's quite possible for the TAC to never hear about a new project, and that's just not, that does not help coordination. Because right now
I
it's
mean,
entirely possible for working groups to do the same thing
mhm.
and not necessarily for folks to know unless, I happen to be on both calls.
That's true. I mean, all of our projects should be like very clearly listed on our README.
I have
Um,
tried to do that. I have tried to do that. Everyone, I have put in pull requests when you create a new project, but that doesn't mean I've always been successful at it. So absolutely, that is something else they want to do. Is every time you kick off a new project, hey TAC, this okay? Probably it's fine. Carry on, add it to,
should,
and then add it to the README page, so that
yeah, should there
so that
be a
everybody who
group?
shows up can find out what it is, huh?
Could there be a group in GitHub that's just CC'd on every kind of README update for new projects? Would that be easier than, notifying the TAC every time?
Well, no, because they want to be notified, and regardless, if it's a new project, hey, notify. As
Yeah,
far
I'm saying
as
we could notify the TAC through GitHub. Right.
sure, make a GitHub issue on the TAC list. That would be fine.
Okay.
I would imagine. I
Would
guess
any
I
of
don't
this
know
fit
how the
into the
TAC's going to
charter?
work. It would not be a bad idea, but I guess technically the TAC hasn't. I think right now, just what I would focus in on, what do you think this working group's supposed to do? The scope. You
So
can kill all the stuff about the TSC because we don't have one. I think the key is just what does this group think it's doing? We have some text in the README. I think we just need to
yeah,
look it over and make some tweaks.
should we duplicate the mission and scope between the charter and the README? Or
I
can we
would do
just
that as a
focus on
start.
README?
To avoid sort of drift between them,
Mhm.
in the securing software repos, the way it works is that we have the abbreviated version, like the introductory sort of wording, and then we point back to the README where we have the list of objectives.
Yeah, keeping it dry does make sense. I mean, if from the charter you link to it, I guess the only problem would be, you change the README without.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, I think the point though is that right now it's not always clear what the working groups are think they're doing. I think that's the key issue right now, is just trying to make sure that there's some swim lanes so we know who does what, sort of.
Mhm.
And there's always going to be blurry lines.
Okay, so yeah, I propose that we take the charter as is, except for updating number 1 to be, as Jacques recommended, super terse, and pointing to our README, where we'll intend to have a more descriptive mission scope. And then on the issue that you raised, Jacques, about the kind of the boilerplate that looks wrong, I think we'll just wait until we get that resolved upstream and then pull it down.
For reference, I'm just going to drop in the link to our PR where we're working on the charter.
Okay. Actually, I'll put that onto the issue.
That would have been a better idea.
Oh, is this not? Oh, great. I copied the Zoom link into the issue. Anyways, I'll fix that. Okay, so as far as getting this merged, if we make those changes, leave the PR open. Should we just leave the PR open until next week, next meeting, and then we'll have a last call for comments? Okay, got a thumbs up. No
Yeah,
objections.
Yeah, Jacques, can you change the whole technical steering? We don't have one. So
We don't either. I see that mostly as part of the mechanism of guardrails. That's why I think the only thing that's really essential is to define your maintainers, because it's been a week or two since I read it, so it's a little vague and fuzzy in my memory, but it mostly bootstraps off who are the maintainers.
Yeah, I mean, if you just delete the holes, we don't have a TSC, so there's no point in having a chart that says we have a TSC. We don't have one.
I would take that question up with TAC, because this is the charter they're handing out as the standard. So
yeah, okay.
I didn't want to sort of deviate too much from the template. I imagine it's been thrashed out in great detail by Linux Foundation Legal. No, it's just picked from the air.
I think they copied what CNCF did and pasted.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't realize that. So
yeah. So
right, well,
I think that's I think it's a perfectly valid comment back up to the TAC. I thought that had been fixed, but I was wrong. So yeah, I think the reply back, maybe the reply back to the TAC is nobody has a TSC. Why is this still in here?
Yeah, and there were discussion exactly on that point, David. I agree with you, but I don't think there's been any formal resolution. And I suspect the answer is going to be, oh, we have a task force working on, the governance documents, and that will be the answer. But so it means it's not going to happen for quite a while.
All right. Maybe the real issue to start with is at least make it clear what the working group's charter scope they think it is. What's the mission? What's the scope? And if it's just a copy and paste for the README or even link to the README, I think that would be the most important part right now.
Well, this puts me in an uncomfortable position because well, in terms of the security and software repo group, in the sense that we've been aiming to adopt the charter at our next meeting and then the following week bring it to TAC for blessing, so that we'd be a grown-up big boy group. It's a terrible analogy, just grown up. And insofar as I saw the TSC mechanisms, I figured, okay, that looks pretty much like something that springs to life when people can't agree. You have the maintainers bootstrap the TSC can take a vote on contentious questions, and if they can't decide on something with that, then they can bounce it up to TAC.
Yeah, I have no objection to a TSC if the group wants to work that way. Just, are you going to work that way?
Yeah, the big thing that makes the whole engine turnover is maintainers who are defined as maintainers, because otherwise the boundaries of a working group are very porous. Like at the moment Shopify is not even a member of the OpenSSF, and yet here I am.
Okay.
Maybe
we need to I'm sorry, go ahead.
How are other groups listing their maintainers?
I think individual projects within a working group have a lead for the most part. The bigger ones have their own, have a group of folks. I don't know if I don't think anybody has a TSC in this sense. As I said, I think what happened is they just copy pasted CNCF. Hey, we need we need some stuff. We'll copy paste. And I thought this had been removed, but I'm wrong.
Sure.
I suspect this is one of the things that the process docs working group that Jory pulled together, that's meeting tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern, and has had a couple of working meetings. We'll get around to is kind of formalizing the working group, member of the working groups, charter for the working groups kind of structure. I think it's been very ad hoc because that's very much how OpenSSF has started and grown, and we didn't want to come in and say, here's the one true path, but I think they're working on the one true path. So I think for now, simpler is better with the charter, saying here's the, if you have a defined membership, I think that's better than not, and a defined lead for the working group is better than not. And I think simpler for now is probably better. And I would expect the charters probably will get kind of templated and standardized across the working groups over time. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it makes me feel like we should just wait.
I was going to suggest you do exactly that. And I know it's been confusing because the TAC on one end said, hey, all the working groups need to get a charter. And then if you had asked, okay, what does it take? They would have said, oh, wait, we don't really know yet.
Yeah,
At least that's what they should have said, because that's a reality. And this is what's coming up here now. It's becoming apparent.
yeah, you're
So
probably.
I agree. Just wait a bit. And by the way, I'm involved in the group that Brian was just talking about. So we had a meeting yesterday and we're going to meet again tomorrow. But I can tell you, based on what, there's very good discussion going on, but we're not going to have an answer tomorrow. So
Sure.
It'll take a bit of time.
Okay, so I'll update the issue. I mean, we have the notes here, but I'll update the issue that we're just kind of waiting. But yeah, it sounds good. Takeaways, I think, are that it sounds like we need to agree on who the maintainers are, or the leaders. I mean, we have the co-chairs, and then who, if there is any process, to be a member, and then the goal, which is, I think, a separate discussion, but we'll just essentially be referencing our goals that we have on the README, and then that can be updated again with a group discussion.
Okay.
All right. Any other notes on the charter? All right, I guess we'll move on. So yeah, I'll preface the next bullet with a little bit of history for those that weren't in the group. Basically, at the end of last year, we went through a process within the group to go through and identify some like 100-ish critical projects, not the top 100, just 100 critical projects. And it was pretty ad hoc, but we did take in a lot of data. Since the beginning of the year, we've been discussing how we're going to come up with, the next version of that list. Are we going to be doing a similar process with more and better data and more and better people? Not better people, but more people. Or are we going to be doing some other kind of, integrating more input that involves reaching out outside the people that show up to this meeting? And we've had a lot of good ideas thrown around for processes or for ways that we can incorporate that. And so I don't know that we have any kind of decisions or exact ideas on what anything concrete, or nobody's raised their hand on saying we're going to go ahead and move forward with this procedure. But Jacques had a lot of good input, and David's asking Jacques for an update. I don't know.
Yeah. So also summarizing history, the two things that I covered in my presentation back in, I want to say the end of February or early March. It's out there if you look for ranking software projects in these minutes. The two things that I covered was a voting system or a direct elicitation of probabilities. And my sort of recommendation, you could say at the time, was to focus on an elicitation over voting mechanisms for a number of reasons. So I've continued to dive into that area of how you elicit and aggregate expert opinions about probabilities. As I was sort of saying earlier in the pre-chat, there are several literatures which naturally don't correspond with each other. And I've been skimming a few of them to get my head around what's out there and what makes sense. I've also got in the back of my head to take some time and smash a prototype just to get something to do anything. It doesn't matter if it's, the formally proved approach to things that somebody wrote in a paper. It's more just a prototype of the user interface of what it would look like. But I did the most important step of any open source project, which is to come up to it with a name that collides with a bunch of other open source projects. What I'm thinking of is SEER, standing for Security Expert Elicitation of Risk.
I commend you for even approaching the idol of open source project naming, much less selecting and proposing a candidate.
Well, it's that's how you know you're serious, is you come up with a clever name. And here's the important thing: you'll notice that as a Rubyist, I didn't come up with a pun, which is a usual sort of style of choosing names for things.
I thought that was a requirement, but we'll let you get away this time.
Yeah, I'm sure that people will come up with Scryer and Prognosticator and other names to go with it. So give it time.
That's all right. The cosine folks have trigonometric puns in their comments. So, all right. Okay, so you said two things. One was voting systems versus elicitation of probabilities, and you think the elicitation of probabilities makes more sense given the literature that you found. What was the second part, though?
The second part was that somehow at some point I want to find the time to build a prototype of what it would look like for the expert. So the point is that they're meant to be shown, here's a project, here's some information about the project that you have asked to be shown, because we can show dozens of data points between scorecard metrics, chaos metrics, whatever else we come up with, over and above links to the project's own homepages, source repositories, etc. There are dozens of data points that we could be throwing at people, but one of the things that shows up in the research is that if you give people too much information, their estimates actually start to get worse again. So my thinking is that they should be allowed to configure which things they look at. But anyway, the idea is that they'd have an interface that would show them some data points. They would then say, I think it's this likely to go bad. And if it goes bad, it's likely to be this bad.
So how does this all scale? Because, presumably we're going to be looking at thousands of components out of millions of projects.
Yeah, that's an open question. Whether there's a lot of problems still to be solved. This is one of the downsides of the elicitation approach, is that there are different problems from the voting approach, not necessarily better or worse. So one of the big problems is deciding whether a probability has been realized. If somebody says it was, like, there are scoring systems for events, like something has or has not happened. So if, for example, we define the probability that's being elicited as the probability of a CVE of a severity X within this next 5 years, that's relatively concrete and measurable. Much harder to measure is the impact. What is your estimate of dollars of impact? Because anything that comes up as the validation will itself be an estimate. But it's still information we want, because we are trying to retire the maximum amount of risk per dollar spent, which means we need to look at both axes. We need to look both at the frequency that something happens and the impact when it does.
Yeah. Commonality is one way you could start to estimate impact. Obviously, it's not really the same measure.
Oh, it's not everything. This is why we want expert elicitation, right? Like if if there was a direct line between something like, downloads from a package repository, and that was, correlated 0.95 with worldwide impact, that would be lovely. But we know, for example, from the classic example of something that gets downloaded once or a dozen times into a CI pipeline, then shows up in a million IoT devices, that unfortunately that relationship is not one-to-one. This is where you need expert opinions to be elicited, because they will be able to encode and combine information that is not available directly in the metrics. There is a possibility in the longer run that those expert elicitations can form the feedstock for a machine learning model that can suss out relationships that we haven't noticed between the data points that are exposed and the predictions. And that will hopefully give us a bootstrap for the tens of thousands of projects that might not get an opinion given about them by experts. But there's no way around the fact that no matter which method we use to try and rank, there are just a shit ton of projects. And we need a lot of people to give a lot of opinions. That's actually incidentally why I was thinking about the impact. Was just like, could you gamify it? Because there are ways of scoring predictions based on outcomes. Like once an outcome is realized, you can then back calculate the score, how good somebody was at predicting something. But that would still require us to say the impact was X.
Yeah, there was an attempt, I don't know if you saw this in the literature, 5 or 6 years ago in making a market, like a futures market for security advice, where they tried to just pay people for getting the right answer. And if I recall correctly, it failed to elicit expert opinions about what they thought was going to happen, even though that they were literally proposing to pay people for their information.
Well, that's depressing. Because I mean, that was one of the things actually that I didn't talk about at the presentation, except in the questions, where it was sort of like, would a prediction market or a futures market work? The difficulty with futures markets is that prediction markets, to effectively elicit opinions and to derive a probability, you need enough people betting enough money. Like it has to be sufficiently deep liquidity. Otherwise, it's very lumpy. And it just falls back to being individual experts. I have some experience with this because I've previously received options in a company that was very thinly traded, and it was always a sort of an exciting day when things bounced around, or when it took several days to sell your shares and so on. And the same problem I think would arise with expert elicitation. If you have 1,000 experts trading in such a market, but you have 100,000 projects for them to trade on, then most things are just not going to get traded. This is the same problem we have voting. This is the same problem we have with expert elicitation, is that we're trying to find what are called libnebraska, where it's obscure, but upon closer inspection turns out to have, relatively high potential frequency and relatively high potential magnitude of impact. That's the hard problem.
I do think that there's hope for identifying libnebraska, in the sense that with some data support, I mean, you're absolutely right. They just, if you talk to just random people looking at their direct dependencies, you won't notice. But stuff like the analysis done by Harvard and some of these other things, I think they at least do a decent job of helping people identify. You no longer have to get people to figure out what they might want to think about and analyze. Here, look at this. Now you can use your human judgment, now that you don't have to try to guess the world at random.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like you want, one of the things I've also been considering including is whether I want people to self-identify their level of knowledge of a project on a scale. Like they could say, I've never heard of this in my entire life. I'm just going on the data you gave me, up to I'm one of the creators or maintainers of this project. But I have two questions, sort of things with that is, one, does it add that much value compared to the cost of another thing that has to be elicited? Every single data point that gets elicited adds that much more to the overhead of getting elicitations, because this is going to be tremendously boring and head thinking exhausting work where you're sort of staring something, or it's going to be people who are just going to click through quickly, just pick things at random. There's no way around it. With the elicitation literature, it mostly focuses on high stakes, small number of predictions. Like about the largest I've seen is 100 variables elicited over several days. Whereas, with a couple of like 24 experts, whereas we're sort of like trying to talk about elicitations on tens of thousands, ideally from thousands of experts. And then hopefully building a large enough data set that we can start to come up with guesstimates of the things that have not been estimated, for which there's no elicitation available.
That's a great point, and I can't think of any counters. Does anyone know of such literature? Because you make a great point. I can't think of any counterexamples to what you've said, Jack. And granted, I haven't done as much research on this as you have. Can anybody suggest somebody we could contact that might have know of a different way to turn over that rock in the academic world?
So I don't have an easy answer, but if the purpose is sort of labeled data elicitation, which is analogous to other machine learning problems, then you see, for example, what I understand the Google image folks did when they didn't have a 10 million size or 100 million size or whatever large set of labeled images. So they paid 1,000 people full time for a year to sit in dark rooms and label images. And then they had the data that they wanted. And that worked because it didn't change, so the only solution I've seen to this is to throw $10 billion at it.
I think this is very different because the imagery stuff, you're counting on humans doing something that they can do in a fraction of a second. They're using their fast thinking, not slow thinking.
Yeah, so what you're saying is that it's even worse and would cost even more money.
Very possibly. That's why I was interested in whether it was gamifiable. Whether you could use one of these scoring systems.
Well, of course, CAPTCHAs are the other thing, right? So can you turn it into a CAPTCHA?
I think another challenge here is that it sounds like you need expert opinions, not just anyone's opinion, right? So you have to be a little bit careful about who's getting the request for data, not just what.
Yeah, you'd want a minimum level. That's sort of where I was leaning towards in the familiarity with project, setting. Like whether you would out of the box give more weight to someone who had higher awareness, although in theory, such an expert should give narrower bands because they have high confidence in their prediction. On the other hand, research shows that experts who walk in off the street are hilariously overconfident, tend to be calibrated very poorly, and will give you very narrow bands no matter what you do, even though the data, if they refer to it, show them that it should be much wider. I sort of talked about this in the presentation where there's this process called calibration, where you give a series of questions to which the answer will be presented afterwards. And they go through that elicitation process for this series of questions. And the feedback is meant to show them that they are being hilariously overconfident and to widen their confidence bands, to pay attention to whether they're being too pessimistic or too optimistic. And that does show a measurable improvement in performance. There's another school of thought that you shouldn't do that, but instead you should take the calibration data for questions to which they do not know the answer and to which you do not present it. But instead you calculate their calibration scores and you use that to weight the expert opinion. The thing about this though, is that in the studies I've seen, a depressing amount of the time, what winds up happening is that out of a group of experts, 1 or 2 experts are the only ones listened to and everyone else gets discarded, which, seems very wasteful to me. Like if we did that, then we'd be throwing out potentially thousands of elicitation results and we just have vast gaps in the data. Like I would rather have let me qualify that. I would rather have an opinion that could then form the anchor for further investigation than to have no opinion. No opinion gives me no signal as to whether I should care, whether this is Lib Nebraska. If somebody comes in off the street, gives an amazingly high score that shoots it to the top, that attracts attention, which draws more experts. More experts can then give it a more fulfilled and detailed estimate from multiple elicitations. I don't know if that answered your question or if I rambled.
I think the the relative paucity of data is a significant issue. Maybe we're going about this the wrong way. Maybe it would be better to have some sort of automated algorithm to do an estimate and then use humans to propose, adjustments to those results.
Just add beacons to every single piece of open source software out there that just beacons back and says, hey, I've been run in this place. And then we just get a count of how often certain bits of software are running. And then, then it's critical.
That should cost, yeah, that has the same problem of getting 100,000 projects to adopt it. I don't know if you're joking, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm joking because it's not practical. Like nobody's going to embed beacons in all of open source software, right? Like,
and if they did, there would be a nuclear explosion at the Orange site.
Yeah, I mean, Debian does have PopCon, although I don't think that's enabled by a lot of folks. So you get, I believe that's opt-in data, the popularity contest. And of course, that only covers, system packages of a particular distro. I have used this as a data source for other things. So, it helps. I mean, at least you do have some real data on use, but you don't have that for ecosystem, only for system.
Well, it's an example of a data point you might surface or allow people to configure to be surfaced when they are given a project record. They're showing the project and here are the data points you've told me that you think are important.
Right. So you can start with things like one of the things that are known quantities are like, go to every single major repository vendor and say, give us the top list of all the projects that would by download count, right? So like, Debian, Gradle, Maven, Maven Central, all those artifact servers, that can be a good starting point, which is not necessarily always public data, but you ask kindly enough and say, this is the purpose, and you can get that as a starting point set of data.
Yes, which is actually a really wonderful segue, considering we have 12 minutes left, to Marina's question about a data warehouse for repository systems.
Yeah, I agree. Let's move on. But before we do, any ideas on like what's the next step here? Or like what do we need more discussion about? And potentially doing something like this.
I'm still like doing reading based on where I can squeeze it in to see if there's sort of like some breakthrough hidden in somebody's book, or more to the point, like it's been infuriatingly difficult for somebody to just give me a formula. Like there's a lot of partial formulas floating around. And I am not a data scientist to start with. So a lot of these things are based in Bayesian analysis or even more exotic stuff. So that's the thing. But the next step for me is basically going to be, insofar as I can find time, and I know we're all busy, is to prototype the user interface for experts. And such things exist. We could even elicit opinions without combining them yet. But it would definitely be worth like having something in front of people. Like there's no better design than working software.
Well, I have to admit, it depends on how complex. I've had more little success of, here's your prototype. It's a piece of paper. We could write this code, but you answer, let's try this 3 times and see if it's actually doable, because no point in writing the code if you couldn't get somebody to do it even after you wrote it.
Well, the holy writ at Shopify is that Rails makes everything easy. So that's where I'll be.
Okay. Sounds great. Yeah, let's go ahead and move on to Marina. Floor is yours.
All right, hello. So as I mentioned a little bit, the idea here is just a proposal for having a data warehouse for software repository data. I think the overall idea is fairly straightforward. We list kind of the reason I'm here, right, is that I think one of the key benefits of this is some of the stuff that you were talking about just now is identifying data about how projects are used, the projects that are stored on these different repositories. And I think there's also some other benefits, specifically kind of how I came to this project had a lot to do with being able to test performance of security solutions on real data to make sure that they actually would work at the scale of these different repositories. And then, of course, the challenging part here is figuring out the engineering of the system, where stuff is going to be stored, who wants to run this whole thing, and what data is available today versus, and that can just be like uploaded to the system versus what data we would have to work with repository maintainers to obtain. Some of the larger software repositories, folks like specifically RubyGems and PyPI, already have a fair amount of this data available publicly. But it's just all in different formats in different places. So this would help centralize that. And then for other folks, this would help come up with what data would be useful to share and figure out if we can get that from whatever logs that they have. So that's the overview. I don't know if there's any particular questions or pieces people want me to go into more detail in here. I think David had a comment.
I'm trying to have a single DB to query. So I tried to add notes to the for this meeting because I've actually looked into this myself. So there is an existing system. It's called libraries.io, and Tidelift is, I would say, well, maintained, I guess, from a technical sense. It lives at Tidelift. I don't want to, I'm actually not trying to cast shade on Tidelift. I've contributed patches to libraries.io in the past. Back when I was at IDA, I used it. Harvard used it in their analysis to use dependency analysis. So clearly there's some value to it because there's something that's there. But this is my opinion. And maybe it's changed recently, but at least when I've interacted with it, with Harvard's interacted with it, it's not really well maintained. And it actually makes sense because I think Tidelift originally was thinking that this is going to be critical to their business, and I don't think it really is. Again, I'm not if somebody here was here from Tidelift, I could get the story, if we could get the story straight from the horse's mouth. So I'm not going to try to speak for them, but I suspect, so how's this? I suspect they thought this was going to be central and it's turned out not to be. And if that's not true, then I'd love to hear what the story is. So I think it would be valuable to have something like this. There has been some brief discussions about this between both Harvard, who has been using libraries.io, and LF Research, who would like to do some supply chain research and would like a database to analyze, and oh, here's what you get. So I think that this does have legs. What might be helpful would be talking with the Tidelift folks, because I don't know what they feel about libraries.io. At least historically, it was open source. As far as I know, it still is. But unless they've had a recent change of heart, I don't think that it's likely to go anywhere. So they might be willing to, transition some of that stuff. Well, we could use their code. But, I think having conversations so that it's all in one place would be really helpful.
Yeah, it's a great idea. And I do think that the scope, at least, of the full proposal is maybe a little bit broader, but I think the stuff that they've done is a great starting point, just getting aggregate data about these different packages and these different things.
I'm sorry, what did you say? Getting what
Yeah.
data?
Like aggregate data, like data, just like download
Irate?
counts. I think that's what they focus on mostly, right? Is download counts, dependency analysis.
No. It's the dependency network. A depends on B,
Okay.
depends on C, depends on D. So that's been their focus of getting that kind of data. Because as you're right, you can get that data, for example, from Ruby gems and so on, but now you have to process everybody's different formats. So loading it all in one place, first of all, beating on those poor repositories only once, because I hear all the repos have other things to do, and then having a common format is really helpful.
I had a question about that actually. Maybe this is diving into the weeds, but is your thinking that you would have a processing pipeline on the LF side that goes out to whatever's available and then churns it into shape, or did you have in mind that you'd have an API that repositories would then report to?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a short-term and a long-term answer, right? The short-term answer is just collect the data and in whatever form it is and put it somewhere. I think in the longer term, it would be nice. I think that to do the processing on the Linux Foundation side, so I think the goal here is not to give more work to repository maintainers. I think they have plenty of other things to do. But if they can just give whatever format of data they have and we can make an automated processing step. Because I think most of the data is somewhat similar. It's in some kind of SQL-like or Java JSON-like format that we can then, put into a standard format.
Download counts are?
I'm sorry, Jonathan?
Are you saying download counts are usually in a database format, or are you saying that what part of the data is usually in?
Yeah, this is download counts and more, basically. So it's all information about, I think the most full data set currently available is, I think Ruby Gems has the download logs for complete download logs with anonymized IPs for all of the different data that basically the requests that they get, they then make public in an anonymized way. PyPI has something similar with just no IP address information. So it's just, like it's not just download counts, but download frequencies, like where the downloads are coming from, repeat people, that kind of stuff, which might be interesting for various types of analysis.
The other one to look at is GitHub has their dependency graph data that is, if you go to like dependency insights on any repository that's using like this, it doesn't work with Gradle, but it works with like Maven, Pip, stuff like that. And that information is also, I don't know if it's bulk available. You can talk to people at GitHub to get that information potentially.
Yeah, it'd be another great source for this. Yeah.
Yeah, I can say specifically for the analysis that Harvard and I did, it was very much I want to know what is most depended on in various infrastructures. So I need not just the dependencies for a package, but the dependencies of all packages. And you can get that with varying levels of effort, and sometimes it's a whole lot of effort. Jeff, you've got your hand up, you're the lead, so you can always speak.
Yeah, so facilitator question, what would you be looking to get out of the OpenSSF or this working group, resources, discussion, just a home?
Yeah, I think a combination of things. I think either resources would definitely be helpful. I think it might make sense for the project to like officially live in the software repositories working group, because the maintainers of these repositories are there, and so that way you can use that communication. But I do just like some just kind of collaboration, maybe resources, and also just letting you know that this data might be available if it's going to be useful here.
Great. Well, I think we're out of time for this meeting, but it sounds like you wanted to do like a round and see maybe where it has the best home. I think it aligns up with the goal of this group well. So I would say before we do like an official vote or consensus, we'll just put it on the agenda for the full 2 weeks, and then do a not a vote, but a discussion in the next meeting or whichever meeting you'd like. That's not right at the end. Does that sound good to everyone?
One of the other places is, I think Veracode has the data, may have some data too, because they do their state of open source every year.
Yeah. Marina, can you shoot me a quick email? Because maybe I can introduce you to some other folks. But I can at least confirm that Harvard used this kind of data. We use this kind of data, so there are users of this kind of data, which I think was at least your initial question.
Yeah, I think I also have a couple use cases for the data, but I want to make sure that it's broadly useful before presenting the the idea. So
yeah. Okay, and maybe I can connect you to some LF research and Harvard folks to continue that conversation.
All right, thanks. Look forward to continuing this in a couple weeks too.
Yeah, thanks, Marina. Thanks everyone else for joining. Great to see you all, and have a good 2 weeks, and see you next time.